Hey everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to Top 10 Middle Game Ideas number 6, the Maroczy Bind. So the Maroczy Bind was named after Geza Maroczy, a Hungarian grandmaster who never played it. So here, first let's put it on the board and then we'll talk about it. So it most commonly arises in the Sicilian. And actually Maroczy liked to play the Sicilian. And he was playing in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So this was actually not a very popular way to play in those days. But let's go forward a few moves. D4, going for an open Sicilian, takes. Let's see, G6, going for a fianchetto here, maybe a dragon variation, and C4. This is the Maroczy bind with E4 and C4, the pawns controlling the key D5 square. So actually, Maroczy, as I was saying, liked to play the Sicilian, and he found himself on the receiving end of a Maroczy bind. In the earliest recorded game where this was played, it was in 1904, and he was impressed with it. He actually won the game. I guess he was a stronger player. Even if he was a bit uncomfortable with black, he managed to find a way to win. But later on, in the year 1906, he wrote an article for the Vienna Chess Times, the Schachzeitung, about the 1905 match game between Tarrasch and Marshall, where Marshall played a Sicilian and Tarrasch could have played a Maroczy bind, could have played the C4 move and never did. And Maroczy in his commentary was so insistent that Tarrasch really needed to play that move, that this move became known as the Maroczy bind. So that's how it got its name. And he was definitely a promoter of this move. He just, I guess, never had the chance to play it in his career. And let's continue on a little bit and let's look at a typical setup here. So maybe knight to f6 attacking the pawn, on e4, the knight to c3 defending it, d6, and then there's different ways to play from here. But we can see that this formation is starting to shape up. This pawn on d6 is frequently played to stop these two pawns from advancing further. Now here's a line I like to play with f3. Actually, this is not an opening. I'm not talking about the opening moves so much, but this is a standard opening position, and the main moves here are knight c2, which is a way that Chess Explained likes to play. And there's also the main move, the immediate bishop e2, but that sometimes allows knight to g4, and then the third choice here is f3. I like to play that way, but let's just play on to a typical position. So f3 does allow this exchange. And so the advantage of the knight c2 move is to actually keep more pieces on the board. We'll come back to that idea, but this is actually a main line as well, where you allow the exchange. And okay, bishop e6 could be played here. Bishop e2, I just want to get the whole position out. Queen a5, castles, rook c8, b3, a6, rook c1, and say rook to f8. So I think of this as the full Maroczy bind setup. This is, when you want to play the Maroczy bind, maybe this is the picture you should have in mind. So notice that white has castled to the king side. So it's not like one of those Sicilians where you castle to the queen side and you have these opposite side attacks. White castles to the king side and puts the bishops one behind the other on the e-file. So they're just stacked up here behind the pawn. This rook will come over to the center, most likely, and keep some pressure on the d-pawn there. The queen, black has a number of different setups here that black can play. So the queen doesn't have to come out this way. The queen could be back here. Could even go here, and b6 could be played to set up a kind of hedgehog. So there are many different setups. This bishop could be back on d7. Black has lots of different setups to play against the Maroczy bind. But the main thing you should notice about this position is that white has more space. And this is the key, one of the key features of the Maroczy bind. The other key feature is the control of the d5 square with all of these pieces looking at the d5 square. And the queen is the only piece that black has that's out on the fourth row. It does seem to have a pretty good view, and maybe it can swing across to the other side. But all his other pieces and pawns are on the third row. So black has to be a little careful to make sure he's not getting squished. But it turns out that black with careful play can have a very solid position. Now, I used to have a lot of trouble playing the Maroczy bind myself. I read that against the accelerated dragon, this was the most principled way to play. So I used to try and play the Maroczy bind all the time, and I would slowly get into trouble, or quickly. And it wasn't until I started watching the videos of Chess Explained, who plays this all the time, that I began to gain some sort of understanding of how to play this position. And I'll try and share that with you. But if you want to, you can go directly to his channel. If you go to his channel and just search for Maroczy, you will find hundreds of games that he's played in the Maroczy bind. It's one of his favorite setups as white. And what he says about this position, which I think is pretty true once you learn how to play it, is that he rarely loses from this position. He's won many games. He's played it over the board as well as in blitz. He's played it against really strong players, grandmasters and international masters, and he really rarely loses. Sometimes he has trouble, converting it to a win, but he can always press for a win. So it's not like you're playing for a draw. It's you're playing for a solid position where you have an advantage and you can press. And I think the key idea that I was missing when I was trying to play the Maroczy bind and failing was that if black plays this correctly, black has a very solid position, so there's no immediate breakthrough. So you do have to do a lot of, you may have to do a lot of slow moves. You may have to do a lot of maneuvering and trying different things and pushing your pieces here and there. And of course, you have to be careful while you're doing that you don't get in trouble yourself. The idea for black in these positions is kind of the same thing. Black can sit back and wait for white to overextend his position and try and take an advantage of it. Or as white is maneuvering, look for little moments where there are slight awkwardnesses in white's position that black can take advantage of. So that is the overall strategy. But, well, first, before we get into the strategy, I would really like to talk about the tactics, because that's kind of fun. And you need to know certain tactical ideas to be able to play this successfully. So let's go back to the beginning and go over this. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of tactics that arise in these Maroczy bind positions. They both revolve around the d5 square, so something to always keep an eye on when you're playing one of these. So let's get back to where we were. So e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4 going for the open Sicilian, the exchange. And now instead of attacking the pawn, black can put a knight out here to attack the pawn, induce white to play the knight here to, that's as a way of avoiding the Maroczy bind. But black also invites the Maroczy bind by playing like this. This is still quite a respectable way to play. So white takes the Maroczy bind. Yeah, now black attacks the pawn, white defends, and plays d6, f3, and now the exchange. We'll talk about some other alternatives at that point in a little bit. Bishop g7, bishop e3, just getting pieces developed now. Queen back to d2, getting out of the glare of the bishop. Right here, last time I looked at bishop e6, or that was the move I showed. This time, say the queen goes to c7, common square for the queen, and then we'll just develop for a while. So bishop e2, bishop d7, rook c1, putting the rook opposite the queen. That's a key to this tactic. E6. E6 is an idea you often see from black, just trying to keep white from planting a piece on the d5 square. Castles, rook c8, piling up on the c file, b3 defending the c pawn, bishop c6, taking a look at the d5 square again, and now knight d5. So this is the tactical idea. So bishop c6 was a mistake. And now it doesn't lose material, but the idea here is that if you take the knight and just take back with the pawn, and you can exploit the pin on the c file and just get your piece back, and in the process you've isolated the d pawn. So you don't win material, but you do win. You gain an advantage through compromising black's structure. So that's the idea there. And then there's other ways black could play this after you put the knight there. Black doesn't have to take, but then the queen would have to find another square. I mean, this is kind of a dominating piece. If black takes, for example, with the bishop, taking with the knight is probably no good because you can take back with the pawn and then you'll get 2 pieces for 1. But you could take with the bishop, and then after taking back, the queen has to move out of the way, and then you can continue to take. And then however black takes back, he could take with the queen or the pawn. But either way, this pawn is going to be left weak, and if he takes with the f pawn, this pawn will be isolated. I mean, if he takes with the f pawn, so this pawn is not isolated, then the kingside structure is a little bit weakened. So however black takes, he'll end up with a slightly weakened position, and white also ended up with the bishop pair. So good position for white. So that's one idea, one kind of tactic that can arise. Here, let's go forward in the other line now. This bishop e6, bishop e2, queen a5. This queen a5 sets up tactics also involving knight d5, so you have to watch out for this all the time. Right now it doesn't work because black can take the queen with check. So you castle, and then rook a to c8. And the knight d5 tactic is almost working, but not yet. We'll come back to this point, but let's go on to a position where it works well. Let's see, b3 here, a6, and rook a to c1, and then I was suggesting rook f to e8 here as a way to continue. But suppose black plays something else instead, maybe b6, defending the queen, and maybe setting up a hedgehog type of formation. After this pawn is defended, I suppose the queen can swing over to the other side or something. Anyway, this is mainly to illustrate the tactic. Now you can play knight d5. And the point is, if the knight is, well, first of all, if the queen is taken, and then the knight can take this pawn with check. And the king is blocked in by this rook, so the king has to step aside, and then you can take the queen back, and then you've just won a pawn. So pretty straightforward, and this pawn, the remaining pawns are weak, so that's all good. Let's see, another option after knight to d5 is to play bishop takes d5. Is that right? Yeah, because the queen is actually defended in this case. Sometimes this is not an option because the queen is actually loose over here. But you can take the queen and then take the bishop. Might even be better to take with the e-pawn in this case. But no, I think taking with the c-pawn is good in this case. It opened up this diagonal for the bishop. And well, the material is equal, but white has these doubled pawns on the a file, and black has a strong advantage here also. With the bishop pair, black is not going to be able to hold on to that pawn, and he's just going to fall behind materially. So those are kind of two typical tactics. Let's back up a little bit. In this position, so let's see, black just played queen a5, and white castled. This helps to set up that tactic, because if the queen takes the queen with check, then you won't have time to throw in a move like knight takes pawn check. The most common move here is actually rook f to c8. That's one way for black to defeat that tactic, because now if you try the same trick, this is a mistake. White can take the queen, you can take the pawn with check, but now the king comes over here and attacks the knight. So it's no good. You're losing material. You get the queen back, but you lose the knight. And the knight could actually have grabbed a pawn with check here, but it's still not going to work out well for white, because eventually white has to take the queen, and he's going to lose lose that knight. So that's no good. The tactic doesn't work if rook f to c8. Now you might wonder, I played rook a c8 and I said this was still okay. The tactic doesn't quite work. You might wonder why it doesn't work here. It's not so obvious, but this is an interesting tactical sequence too. If you try knight d5 here, then black can go ahead and take. You can throw in the check. The king has to move away, so it looks like you've gained a free pawn. But it turns out that this rook, which is under fire, it has to move. It has a good move in rook c to e8. And the way this tactic backfires on white, well, the knight has to retreat. This is really the only square it can go to. And now the black can just take that knight. The problem is that when you take back here, it's opened up this file for the rook to attack the bishop. Actually, it doesn't matter. Even if you take this way, the bishop can just take this pawn. and if you take back, you lose this bishop, and also you activate the rook. So you probably just want to move the bishop out of the way. And if you do that and black retreats his bishop, actually the material is pretty even. Black has the bishop pair. This pawn is under fire. This pawn is weak too. It's about an even position. So you can play the tactic there, but it does not lead to any advantage to white. So you really want to reserve this knight d5 tactic for a time when it's really working. And so I just wanted to point out that idea because you might be tempted to try it right away in this position, but you do have to be aware that you do have a weakness along the e file that gets exposed in that sequence of exchanges. So something to keep an eye out. Okay, that wraps up that little tactical summary. Now I want to go back to the beginning one more time and talk about a few opening variations. This isn't really a video about the opening. It's intended to be about the middle game, so I won't go over these opening sequences in any great detail, but I do want to show you a couple of variations that illustrate some different ideas and approaches to the Maroczy bind. So once again from the beginning, e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6. We'll continue with this line. D4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, g6, and c4, setting up the Maroczy bind. Now knight f6, attacking the pawn, knight c3 defending, d6, stopping the pawns from coming forward. In the other lines, in the previous examples, I've been showing you the move f3, which is not the most popular move here. So let's show you the main line of this variation. So you play bishop e2. At first, it looks like you've prevented the knight from coming to g4 by this move, and it certainly can't play knight g4 right away. But what happens in this line is that black can exchange, and then play bishop g7, and the queen doesn't have to run right away, because if the knight moves now, the bishop is hanging, unless the knight goes there to defend it, but that's not a big threat. So white continues to develop. Black castles. Now the queen drops back out of the way, and it goes to the d2 square, setting up this battery, maybe hoping to trade off this bishop, which is a strong bishop in this position, so that's often a worthwhile trade. And notice that white is not afraid of black playing the move knight g4, which is playable here. The knight is supported by the bishop and attacked by the bishop, so that is a way for black to play. And white doesn't particularly want to trade the bishop, so usually white will end up moving this bishop off of e3. Because that doesn't really gain much for black, after the knight goes here and the bishop moves, the knight really, well, the knight can come to this square. Sometimes it's useful for black. But it's actually not the most popular move for black. So, you know, if black plays a developing move, then white will get in this move f3 and the knight can't come there. So this is kind of a last opportunity for black to play knight g4 if black wants to play that way. But that explains why I like to play f3 a little bit earlier, because I just don't want to have to worry about that knight g4 maneuver. So in this position, like I said, the main line is bishop e2. The move I like to play is f3. In both of those lines, the most popular response is for black to take that knight and for the queen to take back. So this seems to contradict something I said earlier. I said white's strategy is to keep all the pieces on and and then enjoy the space advantage and try and prove that black's pieces will become a bit awkward or have trouble finding squares in his cramped position. But, well, that's not the whole story. You also have an advantage in space, so you don't really need to run from these exchanges. And as I was showing you, both the main line and the line I play allow that exchange. Because even after the exchanges, even if black finds a home for all of his pieces, there's still some sort of persistent advantage that white has with the space and with the control over the d5 square. So it's not necessary to run from those exchanges. That's one point I want to make. But the other point is that the third option here, I think it's actually the second choice in popularity. The move I play, f3, that's the third choice. You can just play knight c2 and play to keep all the pieces on, and Chess Explained likes to play this way. And there's more than one idea with this move. So let's go on a few moves. Bishop g7, be how it would typically continue. I don't know if Chess Explained plays exactly this move order, but this is from the opening book. These are the common responses. So castles, castles, bishop d7, bishop e3. Once again, not worrying about the knight coming to g4, being prepared to reposition the bishop. A6, now f3 stopping the knight from coming forward, rook to c8, rook to c1. And this is where it stops. But let's talk about this position a little bit. So it's similar to what we've looked at before. White may play with b3 here, but there are, with the extra piece, there's a couple of additional ideas. And one of them I particularly like, and I've seen Chess Explained play this maneuver, is you can drop this bishop back to f2, and you can bring this knight to e3. And then after that, you'll have two knights that are looking at the d5 square. And so that's kind of a nice way to play it. Actually, in the opening book, another interesting idea is to play knight to, let's see, oh, rook to c1. Maybe it's instead of rook c1. Well, whether it's in this position or a little later, another idea here is also to play this knight to a3. Go ahead and put it on the board. The knight from a3 protects the c-pawn, so you don't have to worry about this, the bishop and the knights all ganging up on that pawn. And it also stops the b-pawn from coming forward. So that's another idea in this position with the knight. It doesn't have to go back to the center. It can also come out to the side and have a useful role on the queen side. Okay, so that is what I wanted to say about the opening lines. And I think I will wind up this video. This has been an introduction. This is just going to be the first in a series of videos about the Maroczy bind. And in the next video, I'm going to show some example games. So I'll go through the games in their entirety, and you can see how some of these strategies work out in practice. And I will see you then. Bye.